Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an impressive and emotional story. Let's meet Axel Ridgway, a retired firefighter who faced death during a serious health collapse and came back transformed with a powerful message about life and what awaits us beyond it. What he saw on the other side, beings of light, indescribable love and a desolate place, will completely change his view of what happens after death. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for a journey that will touch your heart and challenge everything you believe. My name is Axel Ridgway, and I was a firefighter for over 30 years in Asheville in North Carolina. During my career, I have seen the worst and the best of humanity. Fires that devoured lives and homes, but also acts of courage that restored my faith in people. Despite all the difficulties, I loved what I did. Being a firefighter wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a call to serve, to protect, and, often, to sacrifice. I was always the type of man who avoided thinking about death. Not that I was immune to fear, far from it. But there was something about my work that required focus on the present moment. When you're fighting a fire or rescuing someone trapped in an overturned car, there's no room to think about what happens next. You act, do what needs to be done, and move on. But in 1994, death knocked on my door in a way I never could have predicted. It was an experience that changed everything for me. My view of life, death, and what it means to exist. It was an ordinary day, or at least it seemed to be. My team and I were called to respond to an emergency in a humble neighborhood in the city. The call concerned an elderly woman who had fainted at home. It seemed routine, but as I would later discover, that would be the day my life changed forever. I remember the smell of that house, a strong odor of mold and disease that made me hold my breath. The woman was lying on the kitchen floor, unconscious. As we stabilized her, I noticed a small cut on my hand. No big deal, just a scratch, but it was enough to change everything. At that moment, I had no idea that I had just exposed myself to a rare virus that, in a matter of days, would bring me to the brink of death. What I'm going to tell you now is something that, for a long time, I hesitated to share. It's hard to describe the indescribable, but I think if my story can help someone find comfort or hope, then it's worth it. I want you to know that no matter how dark life may seem, there is something beyond, something so grand that, even now, I can barely understand it completely. When I returned from that appointment, still in my firefighter uniform, life seemed to go on normally. It was just another day in the routine, I thought. But, a few days later, everything started to change. First came the fever. It wasn't an ordinary fever. It was the kind that made my entire body throb, like it was being consumed from within. I thought it was just a bad cold, maybe the flu, something that would soon go away. My wife, Margaret, quickly realized something was wrong. "Axel, you're not okay. Look at yourself," she said one night as I sat on the couch, shivering under a blanket despite the summer heat. "You need to go to the doctor." But I, stubborn as ever, shook my head. "I'm fine. I just need to rest," I murmured, trying to convince myself more than her. After all, I was Axel Ridgway, the man who ran into burning buildings. How could something so trivial bring me down? The following days were a nightmare. The fever wouldn't go away, and I began to feel a weakness that I had never experienced before. Getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, and my appetite completely disappeared. I was losing weight quickly, and Margaret started to insist more. "You're pale, Axel. That's not normal." Finally, on a Sunday morning, things came to a head. I woke up feeling like an electric current was running through my body. My vision was blurred, and my heart felt like it was beating out of rhythm. Margaret, desperate, called the ambulance. I vaguely remember the sound of the sirens and the scared look on her face as she held my hand on the ride to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors frantically examined me. My blood pressure was dangerously low, and my dehydration was so severe that it felt like my body was shutting down. They hooked me up to IV fluids and started me on medication to stabilize my condition. That's when they gave me synthetic morphine to ease the pain, and everything changed. As the medicine entered my system, I felt a rush of heat, followed by a sudden darkness. My breathing became shallow, and soon I heard an alarm go off. "He's coming to a stop!" someone shouted. It was the last thing I heard before everything went out, but the blackout was not the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change my life forever. When everything went dark, I thought it was the end. The pain and tension disappeared instantly, and for a moment there was only silence. But I soon realized something strange. I was fully conscious, more so than I had ever been in my life, but I wasn't in my body. It was as if a rope had been cut, freeing me from an unbearable weight. I looked down and saw something that shocked me. My body, lying on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. Machines were blaring alarms, and someone was shouting urgent orders. Margaret was in the corner of the room, her hands covering her mouth in a mixture of despair and prayer. I tried to call her, but my voice wouldn't come out. That's when I realized I no longer had a physical body. At first, I panicked. Is that it? Is it over? I thought. But before the fear could take hold, I felt something pulling me upward, a gentle but irresistible force. I looked around and saw that it was going up. Above me, an infinite space unfolded, filled with colors I didn't know existed. It wasn't just a sky. It was as if I were entering another universe, a place where time and space no longer had meaning. There, the stars shone with indescribable intensity, but they were not just points of light. They felt alive, pulsing with energy, and I could feel a deep connection with each of them. It was as if each star was a being, an individual consciousness that radiated love and acceptance. The sensation was so powerful that I began to cry, or at least, I felt what would be the spiritual equivalent of crying. Suddenly, music began to fill the space around me, but it wasn't an ordinary song. It was like a vibration, a frequency that I could feel in every part of me. There were no words, but the message was clear. You are safe. You are loved. I was floating, completely immersed in that feeling of peace and ecstasy, when I noticed something moving around me. 3 small beings of light, made of pure energy, appeared. They were like children, playful and full of joy, but there was something deeply wise about them. One of them did a sort of pirouette around me, emitting an infectious laugh. You took your time, a voice resounded, but it was not said in words. It was like a thought transmitted directly to my consciousness. I laughed without understanding exactly what was happening. For the first time in days, I felt no fear or pain, just an indescribable connection to everything around me. It was at that moment that I realized that this was not a dream. I had crossed over into something beyond life, something much bigger and more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. The 3 beings of light continued to orbit around me. Their every movement seemed orchestrated in perfect harmony with the space around us. They were small, the size of a child, and their shapes were indefinite, made of pulsating, multicolored energy. Each seemed to have a distinct personality. One of them was clearly the most playful, twirling around me as if in some kind of cosmic dance. Another had a more serene posture, as if he was observing everything with curiosity and care. The third seemed to be the most curious, coming closer to me, almost as if he wanted to study me. They didn't talk the way we talk, but their messages were clear. It was as if thoughts were directly projected into my mind. I could feel their joy, their lightness, and somehow a deep connection with them, as if they were old friends I hadn't seen in a long time. "You're late," joked one of them, and his voice sounded like crystal clear laughter inside me. I laughed, surprised by my own reaction. Everything in that moment seemed so natural, so welcoming, that it was impossible to feel fear or confusion. "Who are you?" I asked. Or maybe I just thought, because the answer came immediately, as if they already knew what I wanted to know. "We are your longtime friends," replied the most playful being. "You don't remember us now, but that's because you're in a game on Earth." "A game?" I asked, feeling a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Yes," replied the more serene being, "the game of physical existence. It's where you learn, grow, and experience the lessons you chose before you went there." Their words moved me deeply, but before I could ask any more questions, the atmosphere around us changed. A larger presence began to form. It was as if all the surrounding light and energy began to converge into a single point. Little by little, a colossal being of pure energy took shape. He was different from the other 3. His light was so bright it almost hurt to look at, but at the same time he conveyed such a deep peace and love that I felt completely enveloped by it. The 3 little beings stopped their games and positioned themselves as if in respect. "Aryo, he's here," one of them said, with a reverence that I felt too, even though I didn't know why. The greater being seemed to know every detail about me. He didn't need to say anything. I knew I was in the presence of something infinitely wise and compassionate. It was as if he could see directly into my soul. My heart, or whatever I had at that moment, was completely exposed, but there was no judgment, just absolute acceptance. "Axel," he said, his sound filling everything around me. "Welcome." The emotion I felt at that moment was indescribable. Invisible tears flowed, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly home. The larger being looked at me, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he looked through of me. It was as if his presence could penetrate every part of my essence, revealing everything I was, everything I had ever been, and everything I could be. There were no words, but I knew exactly what was about to happen. Somehow, I knew he would take me on a journey through my own life. "Let us begin," said the being in a calm, yet immensely powerful tone. As soon as he spoke, the space around me changed. The sparkling universe of stars and lights gave way to a kind of living canvas, where images began to form. These images were moments in my life, not just the big events I might have expected, but also the little details I never knew mattered. The first moment I saw was me, as a child, holding my father's hand as we walked along a trail in the woods near our house. I felt the rough texture of his hand, the sound of the leaves beneath our feet, and the warmth of the sun on my skin. It was such a vivid memory that it felt like I was there again. I could feel my father's love for me, something that, at the time, I couldn't fully understand. "You were deeply loved," said the larger being. His voice sounded like a melody inside me. The scenes continued to play. I saw my adolescence, my moments of rebellion, and the times I hurt people around me without realizing it. I saw the day I decided to become a firefighter, the first time I saved a life, and the nights I cried in silence after losing someone I couldn't save. Every moment was filled with such intense emotions that it was as if I were living it all over again. "You think the little things don't matter, Axel," the being said, as a scene of me holding the door open for a stranger on a rainy day appeared. "Hey, but these are the things that build connections, that leave invisible marks on others. Nothing is insignificant." The review continued, and I began to realize how my acts of kindness, even the simplest ones, had impacted others. But I also saw the moments when I failed. I saw the times I was harsh with Margaret, the nights I let work consume my time with my family, and the words I never said to my children because I didn't think I needed them. The pain of these memories was difficult to bear. I could have been better, I thought. And before I even finished the thought, the larger being responded, "Everyone could. The purpose isn't to be perfect, Axel. It's to learn and grow." He showed me one last scene, a night when I sat with a young fellow firefighter who was thinking about giving up the profession. I didn't even remember this conversation, but I saw how my words encouraged him to continue. He ended up saving several lives in later years, and the impact of that reverberated in a cycle I never could have imagined. "Do you see it now?" asked the larger being. "Every choice, every word, every moment matters, and you still have a lot to do." I felt a wave of emotion so strong that I thought I wouldn't be able to bear it. I wanted to argue, to say I had done enough, but something inside me knew he was right. "But why me?" I asked. "And why do I still have to go back?" "Because the love you planted still needs to grow, and you are the gardener." After the life review, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. On the one hand, I was deeply touched by the way small acts of kindness created ripples that spread far beyond what I could have imagined. On the other, the guilt for the times I failed still weighed like an anchor on my soul. But most of all, there was an overwhelming feeling of peace, something I had never experienced before. I wanted to stay there, in that state of love and acceptance, forever. The larger being, however, seemed to have other plans. He approached, or maybe it was me who approached him, I can't explain, and transmitted his next message directly to my consciousness. "You need to go back, Axel. Your journey on Earth is not over yet." My heart, or whatever the essence of me was at that moment, sank. "I don't want to go back," I replied, with a desperation that I didn't even try to hide. "My wife and children are strong. They will overcome my absence. I want to stay here. I no longer belong to the physical body." The larger being remained calm but firm. "They are strong, yes, but your presence is still necessary. There are things only you can do, lessons you have yet to learn, connections you have yet to strengthen." Before I could argue further, the mood around us began to change. The vibrant stars, the golden and bluish tones, and even the small beings of light began to fade. I felt like I was being transported, but this time not upward, but to a much darker place. What appeared before me was a completely desolate place, an empty, gray field stretched as far as my eyes could see. The floor felt like it was made of sterile dust, and the air was heavy, as if it was filled with sadness and abandonment. There was no light, just an oppressive gloom that made me feel small and isolated. Instinctively, I started walking, even though I didn't know where I was going. With each step, I felt a growing uneasiness, a sense that I was approaching something terrible. It was as if the emptiness around me was alive, waiting to swallow any shred of light I carried. "Why am I here?" I asked in a desperate scream, not knowing if anyone was listening. The answer came, but not from the greater being. It was like a distant voice inside my mind, soft but full of authority. This is a reflection of what happens when souls disconnect from love. When separation and fear take hold, this is the result: loneliness, emptiness, and despair. My breathing, or the spiritual equivalent of it, became heavy. It was difficult to bear that. "Is this hell?" I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. "No," replied the voice. "It's not a fixed place, but a state of being. It's what happens when you choose to live disconnected from your essence, from your light. You felt a little of this in your life, Axel, in the moments when you let work consume you, the times he walked away from those he loved, but there was always a choice to change, and there always will be." The words hit me like a shock. It wasn't a condemnation, but a reminder that our choices, thoughts, and connections shape the reality we experience, both in life and beyond. Suddenly, I felt a tug, as if something was pulling me out of that dark place. The darkness began to disappear, and a soft light began to envelop me again. Before I was completely taken away, I heard the voice once again. "Remember, Axel, love is always the way out." As the soft light began to envelop me, I felt my being pulled downward, as if I was being sucked in by an irresistible force. It was the opposite of the lightness I had felt when leaving my body. The feeling was dense, heavy, almost suffocating, as if I was being forced to fit back into something small and limited. All around, the vibrant golden light I had experienced moments before began to fade, replaced by a dark, dull space. It wasn't like the bleak place I had passed through before, but rather something closer to the physical, to what I knew as reality. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to return to that state of peace and absolute love, but it was as if there was no choice. Suddenly, I felt an impact, a violent shock, as if my soul were being thrown back into my body. The weight and rigidity of the physical body were oppressive, almost intolerable. It was as if I had exchanged a light, comfortable suit for iron armor. The pain that had disappeared during my experience returned in an instant, hitting me like a crushing wave. I heard voices around me. They were muffled at first, but gradually became clearer. "He's coming back," one of the voices shouted. It was a mix of relief and euphoria. I opened my eyes, but my vision was blurry. I saw figures moving frantically around me, and then I heard a voice that I recognized immediately. "Margaret, Axel, Axel, can you hear me?" she cried, her hand holding mine so tightly, it seemed like she feared I would slip away again. I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry. I tried to move my lips and, with great effort, managed to mutter, "I'm back." Margaret burst into tears, kissing my hand and repeating, "Thank God, you're back." Thank God. Doctors continued to monitor my condition, and I could feel pressure from electrodes and tubes throughout my body. My heart was weak, but it was beating. The weight of gravity, pain, and the effort to breathe was exhausting. But what hit me even more was sadness. The sadness of having left that sublime state, that home that now seemed so far away. As Margaret cried with relief beside me, I felt tears streaming down my own face, not from happiness, but from overwhelming longing. It was as if I had been ripped from paradise and thrown back into a world that now seemed small and insignificant in comparison. "You're going to be okay, Axel," Margaret told me, trying to comfort me, but her words were a reminder of what I still couldn't accept. I was back. He had been sent back, and now he needed to find a purpose to stay here. The doctors explained that my survival was a miracle. My heart had stopped for over 3 minutes, and they were prepared for the worst. But against all odds, my body responded to the resuscitation attempts. "You are a strong man, Mr. Ridgway," said Dr. Carlisle, who had supervised my case. Many don't come back from where you were. I wanted to tell him it was more than physical strength, that something bigger had happened. But at that moment, all I could do was nod slightly. I knew no one would understand what I had experienced, at least not at that moment. Lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, my body exhausted and my mind still confused, I began to wonder, what does it all mean? Why did I come back? The days following my return were the most difficult I have ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical pain, although it was always there, like a reminder of my fragile body. What hit me most was the overwhelming sadness at having left that sublime place. There I was free, unlimited, bathed in love and peace. Here, everything felt small, heavy and suffocating. I felt like a prisoner, confined once again in a body that seemed inadequate to the vastness of what I had experienced. Every sound, every touch, every smell in the hospital seemed amplified, but in an unpleasant way. The voices were shrill, the fluorescent lights were harsh, and even the air seemed thick. It was as if earthly life had lost its luster compared to what I had lived. Margaret was by my side the whole time, holding my hand and trying to cheer me up. "Axel, you're alive. That's what matters. You came back to us, and that's all I could ask for." I knew she was right, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of loss. "I didn't want to go back," I admitted one day, in a low, husky tone. It was the first time I said it out loud. Margaret looked at me, surprised and hurt. "Why would you say that? Axel, we need you. Me, the boys. We all need you here." "I know," I sighed, trying to find the right words. But there it was so different. There was no pain. There was no fear. It all made sense. She squeezed my hand tightly. "But this is where you belong now. This is where your family is, where your life is. Maybe you came back because there's still something important for you to do." These words echoed in my mind in the days that followed. As much as I wanted to return to that sublime state, something inside me knew that Margaret was right. The greater being had made it clear that my journey was not over yet, but I still didn't know what that meant. During the days I spent in the hospital, I began to reflect on everything I had seen and felt during my experience. I remembered the life review, how each small act of kindness had had a greater impact than I could ever imagine. I also remembered the desolate place, a reminder of how disconnection from love and essence can lead to a devastating emptiness. These memories began to shape my outlook on life. I realized that I could no longer live the same way as before. My job as a firefighter had always been about saving lives, but now I understood that saving lives wasn't just a physical matter. There was something greater, a purpose to spread love, to make genuine connections, and to comfort those who were lost or hurting. After 2 weeks in the hospital, the doctors finally said I was out of danger. Margaret was radiant, but I still felt like a divided man. Part of me was here, but another part of me still longed for this place that felt more real than anything I had known on Earth. When leaving the hospital, something caught my attention. It was a sunset, simple but magnificent. The skies were painted in shades of orange, pink and gold, so vibrant that they reminded me of the colors I saw in that universe full of stars. For the first time since I woke up, I felt something different, a flash of gratitude. Maybe, just maybe, Earth still had its own beauty, even if of a different kind. In that moment, I promised myself I would find purpose, that, in some way, I would honor the second chance I was given. I didn't know exactly how I would do this, but I knew that starting was the first step. After I was released from the hospital, life seemed to return to normal, at least on the surface. I returned home with Margaret, but nothing really felt the same. The routine, the small everyday problems, the casual conversations, everything seemed insignificant compared to what I had experienced. I could no longer ignore the lessons that the greater being and the small beings of light had shown me. Love, connection, compassion, these were the pillars of existence, and I knew I needed to do something with this understanding. The first challenge was to discover and share my experience. Initially, just thinking about telling my story to someone gave me a lump in my throat. Who would believe something so out of the ordinary? Even though I was a respected man in Asheville with decades of service as a firefighter, this was a story that could make me seem crazy. I told Margaret everything for the first time. I chose a quiet night when we were sitting on the porch, watching the stars. At first, she was silent while I spoke, without interrupting, without asking questions. I told every detail, the colorful stars, the playful beings, the greater being, the life review, and even the desolate place. When I finished, I anxiously awaited his reaction. Margaret looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I believe you, Axel. And I think you need to tell other people." Her courage gave me strength. I started by sharing my story with my pastor, a trusted man in our community. He listened attentively and, to my surprise, showed no skepticism. Instead, he said, "Axel, perhaps God gave you this experience so that you could bring comfort to people. There are many who need to hear this." Over time, I began speaking in small groups, first at church, then at community events. Every time I told my story, I saw how it touched people. Many came to me afterwards in tears, saying how my story brought them peace, especially those who had lost loved ones. "You gave me hope," they said, and it filled me with a joy I hadn't felt since my experience. I realized that my purpose was greater than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about saving lives in physical emergencies. It was saving hearts, souls, bringing comfort and understanding about what exists beyond this life. I became an informal counselor for grieving families, often sharing with them what the greater being had shown me, that death is not the end but a transition to something greater. Once, a young man came up to me after a lecture. His eyes were red from crying. He told me that he had recently lost his father and was struggling with the pain of not saying goodbye. I held her hands and said, "Your father is not far away. He is connected to you in a way that will never break. All you have to do is remember the love you shared." The impact of this conversation was immediate. He cried, but this time it wasn't a cry of pain. It was a cry of relief, of understanding. It was at that moment that I realized that my mission was being fulfilled. As the years passed, I continued to share my story whenever I could. Each account brought new connections, new understandings, and most of all, a sense of peace for those who listened. I never stopped missing that sublime place, but now I knew why I had returned. The love I felt there was the same love I needed to plant here. In the end, my near-death experience wasn't just transformative for me. It was a message to the world. Love transcends everything. Connecting with others is what really matters. And more than anything else, no one is truly alone. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.